The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Keep your company and products relevant, competitive, and reliable by standardizing your security framework to protect intellectual property, become a reliable business partner, and guard financial and customer information. Standards Connect is an online standards management solution from ANSI. It's Standards Access Simplified. Standards Connect is a cost-saving, fully customizable solution for entrepreneurs and companies that spend $2,000 or more per year on standards and want to translate spend into a subscription model, want to simplify access, search, monitoring, and collaboration, or need a centralized hub of standards for multiple users at one or more locations. Get a free trial at securityweekly.com/ANSI. That's /ANSI.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque. These days, it's rarely a case of if you'll be hacked, and more a question of when. Once the attacker is past your defenses, they cover their tracks and systematically infiltrate your network to steal information or shut your business down. You need to rethink the way security is delivered for your digitally transformed business, and there's one security solution that delivers it all: NetScout. Get visibility without borders for consistent detection, mitigation, and prevention across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Learn more at securityweekly.com/NetScout. Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia this October 10th and 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a 15% discount to sit for any of their bootcamp courses or workshops. Visit securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted to register now. Also, register for our upcoming webcast with Viavi, ISC Squared, and Security Weekly's Evaluating Security Vendors Without Losing Your Mind by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, including that great session we did with SaltStack a couple weeks ago, you can find all of our on-demand content at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, Jason, let's dig into this week's articles.
Absolutely. This first one's great. I absolutely loved it.
Well, I'd been holding this one for a couple weeks because I wanted to do it after the July 4th holiday and talk. Yeah, it came. I think it was out like 2 weeks ago, and I wanted to talk about Ben Franklin because when we think about the Declaration of Independence, a lot of people think Thomas Jefferson. There were actually 5 authors of the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, you had Thomas Jefferson from Virginia. You had John Adams up in Massachusetts, Ben Franklin from Philadelphia. And the reason they needed multiple authors for the Declaration of Independence is because the 13 colonies needed to agree across the colonies on how they were going to make this declaration. Thomas Jefferson gets a lot of credit because Massachusetts needed buy-in from Virginia and vice versa, but Ben Franklin was a big part of that.
Absolutely.
And I thought this article was really interesting because it breaks into some of the beliefs around the way Ben Franklin ran his life and just some really interesting leadership lessons out of this article that I wanted to cover.
I mean, so, for someone like myself who has always been big on community service, I actually threw my hat in the ring for politics at one point in time, really studied a lot about Ben Franklin and his history and some of the things that he did over time. It's just amazing. People don't realize he's one of the most brilliant Americans of all time, honestly. I mean, for someone who had, very minimal education, he's someone who was able to actually challenge himself intellectually, learn from practical intelligence and experience, and became, one of the most incredible inventors, scientists, writers, of our nation.
Yeah, he was only educated till like 10 years old.
Yeah.
Then went into an apprenticeship with one of his older brothers on the printing press side.
Mm-hmm.
Did his own writing. He was just amazing. He didn't have to have formal education.
That's right.
And just some great lessons out of here around, challenge yourself intellectually pretty much every day, right? Don't stop. He talks about choosing your friends wisely.
Yeah, that's a huge one for me.
Don't ever stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I loved about what Ben Franklin did, he actually created, because he thought, the people that surround yourself with, they're going to make you a better person, or they can be toxic to you, right? And he realized this, so he actually created this group called the Junto, right? And it's a play on a Spanish word of junta, right, which means assembly, and it was found. The name was because they mispronounced it, but it became this ability that every Friday night the intellects would get together and they'd debate each other, and they had rules and they had virtues they needed to follow, and it was just a structured way to share information with each other, learn from each other, have good debates with each other, constructive debates with each other, and he realized very quickly that by having these sessions, he could surround himself with the best minds in the country.
Yeah, and he did, was just amazing in what he did.
Mm-hmm.
For the world, not just for our country,
Agreed.
but just the things he was able to do globally was just amazing.
Yeah. And one of the things that this article pointed out too is that he was very fanatic about scheduling every day. He made sure that he had a plan for every single day that he could execute against, and really be able to become that diverse and successful person that he was in so many different fields.
Yeah. Yeah, and he says, don't wait. Just start today and do it right away.
That's right.
All right. Our second article is on leadership as well, right? Mm-hmm. How to brand yourself as a leader at your company. I think this is one of the articles you pulled in a couple of weeks ago that we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. So this was a great article, because one of the main points you get out of this article is it doesn't matter what role you play, what your title is. You can be a leader. You can be an influencer within your organization, right? Work to become more visible, showcase your leadership skills, and really don't pigeonhole yourself either. There are going to be your strengths that you have, but, always look to expand your ability to be a leader. Always look to take yourself out of that comfort zone and do things like speaking and presentations and getting yourself in front of the organization so you can be seen as that leader, right? No matter your role, no matter your title, act accordingly, and you will be, you'll create that pathway into a leadership role.
Yeah, and one of the first tips here is really working on your communication skills. Something that all great leaders need. It's the first tip here is really explore your voice, work on those communication skills, because they're going to help you as you go through. Obviously, it talks about upskill yourself and your team. And the next article also gets into this a little bit as well, which I brought here. I think also one of your articles, which is put your team before you as a leader.
That's right.
Right? Yeah. Is always make sure you're doing the right thing for your team. And that also shows your leadership, not only to the team, but to the rest of the organization.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, these two articles kind of play into each other, right? So this article actually brought out something that surprised me, right? Because upskill yourself in your tribe was one of those main points. And one of the statistics it had was 90% of organizations and people in organizations believe that you should have annual trainings or upskill, engagements, things like that. But come to find out, only a third of organizations actually work really hard to make that happen, which was surprising to me, right? Because, training your staff and training your employees, I look at as something critical to your business unit and to your organization. So training for me is always at the forefront of my budgeting and my scheduling. And again, you can get it in many fashions. It doesn't always have to be paid for, right? You can be innovative with that. And that's really putting, a lot of times as a leader, you have to put your staff before yourself, right? Because if you have the ability to go to a training, but it's going to limit your staff from being able to attend, maybe you send somebody out and they become train the trainer, right? They go out, they get educated, they come back to the organization, and they train everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for organizations to block out sometimes time for training, but it is important. It's an important part of up-leveling skill sets in the organization. Mm-hmm. You have to make the investment, though, and whether it's an individual person, like you said, train the trainer, whether it's other online courseware, whatever, I think it is important for organizations to continue to carve out some of that time for training and make it a little more front and center.
Agreed. Yeah, no, the other attribute that I pulled out of the article, too, was just be good at requesting feedback, right? Getting constructive feedback is always going to give you that 360-degree view of yourself and your strengths and your weaknesses, and it's going to allow you to adapt and overcome certain things. Where if you're siloed away from that feedback, you're never going to grow, right? You're never going to be able to take some of the things that you could strengthen up and have visibility into them, and really it'll just be a blind spot for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been conscious about as I joined Security Weekly, right? Is I'm soliciting feedback from our viewers, our listeners, right? I want to know, what do you like? Topics. What topics are we covering and not covering for you? Guest suggestions, et cetera, because I think it's important to really understand that feedback, not only at the individual show level like ours, but also across the entire platform, because we do so much content out to the community. I always want to know, okay, what do you guys like? What do you still want to hear? What are we missing? Because we want to get better. I want that feedback. Very candid. We talked about this a few weeks back. Some of the articles we were covering, somebody questioned, and I've made it a point to make sure I look at the source of the articles that we cover to make sure that they're relevant. So we take that feedback very seriously here, and any leader who doesn't want feedback is definitely asking for trouble.
No, agreed. And it's important, right? That's how we're going to be able to, here at Security Weekly, for example, provide better content. Right, we want to get the feedback. So the listeners and the folks watching, we want to actively know, what are topics you want to hear about? What do you want us to be speaking about? So having that level of feedback and how we can refine our skills is always beneficial. It's beneficial for the whole community.
Yeah, definitely. Do you use time blocking?
So from my perspective, this was a very this article hit home, right? Because I do this to a T. I joke with my wife that if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. So this was a very eye-opening article in one piece, and the other side of it said, you know what, I'm going to continue to do this, even though the author said he had to think twice about it.
I'm with you, right? I have to put the stuff on my schedule. I have to block out time. And part of the reason for me, Jason, is I give people the ability to schedule a meeting on my calendar is if it's available. So if I don't block out some time to finish my prep for a show, for example, I'm going to run into trouble.
That's right.
But I also know that if something pops up, which is what this article talks about, right? Team had a crisis. I also know that I'm probably prepared enough that I can also take on that crisis, not necessarily finish my task. I'll get to it later. I'll be okay.
That's right.
But I put the time blocks on my calendar just so I'm a little more prepared and organized throughout my day for something that might come up like this.
Absolutely. And it's a balance, right? I mean, for folks who have a very busy schedule and they have a lot going on, without time blocking and doing things like this in one way, shape, or form, whether it's keeping a task list or putting it in your calendar or something to that effect, you're more apt to lose sight of certain things. So for me, it's a framework, it's a structure for me to work within, but it's a balance because I have to be able to adapt. So if there's a crisis and something happens, I can easily shift that time with maybe something else, right? Or move that time later in the day and just kind of play around with my calendar to make sure I'm hitting the item that I had to hit before the crisis hit, but at the same time prioritizing what's important my staff, for example. This was about a staff crisis that happened, and the person had to actually shift their calendar around to focus on that. But it's about prioritization, right? Your people always come first. So take whatever you had in your calendar, push it aside, reschedule it. Typically, I'm doing that on the fly. If there's something that comes in that's a crisis, I'm already shifting what was on my calendar to another time, another open spot.
Yeah.
Or so looking for help, right? I mean, sometimes I can have someone on my staff kind of fill in. Hey, can you jump on this call for me? Hey, can you join this meeting for me? It's beneficial, right? To always have someone who can step in for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this week with Paul, right?
That's right.
Paul's out again this week. Complete. He was supposed to be back, but family
surprise.
Emergency. So right. Yeah, I mean, so here we are. We're making the adjustments this week. That was our Monday morning, was making sure we got everything covered for the week. That's right. With Paul being out again. So does that mean it's hard for us to break out of our typical standards of the way we think?
I think people get set in their ways, right? I mean, it's one of those scenarios where you can become complacent very easily, but I think good leaders want to do things differently, right? They want to work outside of their comfort zone and really try new things. So again, it's a balance, right? So don't become complacent. Don't get stuck in that structure where you're completely locked in and you can't be flexible. You have to have that balance. So be flexible enough to be able to break out of that standard day-to-day whirlwind and be able to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest challenges for some of us, right? Is we're so used to a specific way. It's hard for us to think differently. And that's one of the challenges I think we have, is finding the time to think about things differently or look for different ways to solve a problem, just because we're so used to doing it the way we've done it forever.
Yeah, and in the article, I think one of the good points that they made about being able to do that, change that pattern of thinking, is to take a step back and think about how someone else in the organization would perceive it. Right? How would they perceive this challenge? How would they perceive this initiative? And step out of your own shoes, step out of your own parochial thinking, and really think from the perspective of someone else.
Yeah, agreed. I brought in another Vanessa Van Edwards article this week because I got some really good feedback actually last week on the presentation one.
Awesome.
And I knew I wanted to cover this one. So I brought in how you should and should not start a presentation. I think this is a really good lesson for people because I see this mistake a lot.
Yeah.
And the first thing people will do when they go to start a presentation is they'll be, is this microphone on? Is this thing working? Right. So don't do that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so nervous. Oh, there's so many people. I'm so nervous.
Yeah. Or I'm so nervous. I get up there. Oh, yeah, right. Don't do that. And then, thanks for having me, the niceties, right? The thanks. And I added a fourth one because one of the things you shouldn't do is really introduce yourself. Typically, you're going to get introduced.
Absolutely.
When you go up on stage.
Right.
And so introducing yourself again doesn't really work. People know who you are because you're either in the program or somebody's introducing you. The other mistake I see a lot of people do is, hi, my name's Matt Alderman, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Nobody cares.
Right.
They already should know, and so don't start with that.
Yeah. Another one too, and I think the folks in technology and security can fall victim to this, is don't start off too techie. Don't get in the techie weeds, right? Don't get down to the bits and bytes. Because again, your opening statement is really that first impression, and that's how you capture people's attention, like the article says.
Right. You have about 30 seconds to get that first initial point across, to grab their attention for them to stay engaged. And that's why you should start with an interesting story. That's one way to do that, right? If you have an interesting story that kind of sets up the topic for what you want to talk about, that engages people to listen to that story and then stay engaged.
Yeah.
You can throw out a big idea. Yep. This is what I would do with my keynotes, for example. When I was doing the keynotes at RSA conference in Singapore and Abu Dhabi, it was always a big idea. That was my opening line, whatever that idea was. And then the rest of the presentation would kind of go down that whole big idea path and tie that whole story together. Yeah, exactly.
Take you through that journey of that big idea. No, that's great. One of the pieces I loved here was, a good method is to start with kind of a quirky one-liner, but it had a note of caution, make sure that one-liner is not in your title slide or in your slide, right? Because that's a rabbit hole you can fall down as well. Because you ruin the moment at that point if it's in your slide.
Exactly. And the thing with a quirky line is you've got to be funny. Yeah. And I have been told by my wife multiple times, I'm not funny when I try to be funny. So right. Don't go there. So I don't
try to do it on purpose, line. Matt. No, I think another great piece of this article too, and a lot of people can probably use it as reference, is that they have some of the best opening dialogues from any speech from all times. I mean, it goes all the way through. It goes Patrick Henry, Frederick Douglass, all the way to Simon Sinek. You know, as far as some of the best speeches and opening lines for speeches.
Yeah. There's some great examples in here for anybody that wants to see examples of both good and bad speeches. She lays out both, and I think it's just good to have good reference points, right? These worked well, these didn't work well. So if you're thinking about putting together a presentation, use this as a quick reference guide. I think it will help you not make a mistake that others.
Right, and there's some good video content in here too, from like TED Talks and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And TED, when you do TED, remember, you've got a short window. You've got to get to your point and get that story across in a very succinct time frame. Keynotes are like that. Other presentations where you have 45, 50 minutes, you have time to build up parts of the story. But when you're in a short format, you really have to be cognizant about getting your points across very succinctly and building that momentum.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue the shorter presentations are harder than the longer, right? Because most folks can sit there and write out and create 50 slides, but when you have to take those concepts and condense them down to 15 minutes, it's difficult.
Yes, agreed. Very much so. All right, this last article, I had to bring it in here, where on Microsoft leads the SaaS market. And the reason I did this is because years ago, a lot of us thought Microsoft was done as a company, right? We saw the writing on the wall with Windows and the open source community around Linux. We saw the same thing with the Office suite and some of the open Office products and the Google suite. We saw this with email and Outlook and other things. And so some of us thought Microsoft as a company's done. But in this recent survey,
I know
they've reinvented themselves. They are leading the SaaS market. And you're talking about big names here. You're talking Salesforce, right? ServiceNow, SAP. I mean, super large SaaS-based companies. Microsoft's leading the pack. And the reason I brought this in is you want to talk about innovation. You want to talk about strategic change. The things that Microsoft has done over the last few years to put them in a position with what they're doing with Office 365 and Outlook in the cloud and Azure is a major shift in the way that company was being run for a number of years.
Oh, absolutely. And their growth is amazing. What was it, 34% year over year?
Yes, and they own 17% of the SaaS market, I think is what it was, but their annual growth is 34%. Compared to Salesforce, it's at 21%. Right. Look, Salesforce is the big SaaS player out there, and Microsoft's beating them not only in share, but in growth. That's a huge change.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, the article actually says, that the other vendors kind of have that niche market, right? Like Salesforce with the CRM and things of that nature. So, I mean, they're continuing to see growth, but I think Microsoft kind of has that diversity across.
Yeah, and hats off in the strategic change, the change in leadership to actually execute on the strategy. Absolutely. Because both on the SaaS side and with the cloud business, they are definitely growing, and they are going to be around for a long, long time to come.
Absolutely.
And I think that's very important. Yeah. All right, Jason, thank you as always for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.